Welcome to another edition of the Broker Roundtable. We are incredibly excited that you have joined us this morning, but we are more excited about our guest lineup and the brain power that we have here this morning. We have our very own Marge Lindsay here, the Director of Education at West USA. We got Jim Sexton, the designated broker at Realty One Group, and we've got your Arizona Department of Real Estate Commissioner, Judy Lowe, in with us today as we talk about issues that you are facing as agents and what they have to face as brokers and as the commissioner. And as always, I am your host, Mike Weinstein from the Six-Figure Mind Shift. So today what we're going to do and what we're going to talk about, if we can get our screens to work, all right, is the horror stories in the real estate industry. And I don't know whether you guys all appreciate it. It is October 1st. This is my kids, outside of Christmas, this is my kids' favorite holiday. We've already got all the Halloweens purchased, and they're running around the house all dressed up. But so we thought, hey, there's not a better topic to talk about than the horror story. So let's jump right into this roundtable and talk about the first scenario. And please keep in mind, as listeners, these are the scenarios that you guys face. And as I go through these, I'm thinking, as a real estate agent since 2002, I think I've been faced with every single one of these as issues. So let's dive right in, and then we'll just open it up to the floor for our guests here. But horror story number one: the listing agent is the seller of the subject property. A buyer comes in to an open house and expresses interest in buying the home. The listing agent writes the contract as a limited representative. Jim, are there any concerns?
Just one. Who do you really represent? And that's the problem that a dual, we call it limited representation. Obviously in the field, we also call it dual agency. And the question becomes, who do you represent? Are you really going to be a limited representative and look out at all for for any buyer concerns? And the answer is no. So Legal Hotline of AAR came out about 2 years ago and said to brokerages across the valley and across the state is get this out of your business practices. Make sure agents are aware that limited representation on a property that they have an ownership interest in is not a good idea. Marge, how do you guys handle it?
Same way. Say, oh, please, no. The biggest concern, of course, is when we look at whether it's the commissioner's rules, the code of ethics, or any other kind of statute that we look at, is the biggest concern is, are you going to be able to treat that other party, in this case, the buyer, putting their interests first and foremost? When we say from a fiduciary relationship standpoint, you have the loyalty issue, and that's supposed to be undivided loyalty. And how can you say that when you're a principal in the transaction? And I know when I teach classes, one of the things that I will frequently ask is, do you think there's any court in this land that will ever believe that you as an owner, part owner, full owner, whatever, are always going to put your client's interests first and foremost, even ahead of your own? And they're not going to. As well-intended as we are, I'm not going to say, oh, okay, Judy, by the way, you need to do this because even though it's going to cost me $10,000, it's in your best interest. And so you look at that, and that's why our forums all say there will be conflicts. Not that there might be, there will be.
Now, Commissioner, I know that your phone rings all the time and you get a lot of stuff on your desk. And as real estate agents, we're familiar with the term fiduciary. We understand that we have fiduciary responsibilities to all of our clients. But how much easier would your job be? And especially when we're talking in this kind of specific scenario, if real estate agents would just use that as the filter. We know it in the back of our heads, but we don't look at every scenario, every situation when we're writing contracts of putting that filter, putting that prism on and saying, okay, what are my fiduciary responsibilities? Because I would think that I think this scenario might just be out of habit. They just, without thinking, they fill out the paperwork. But if they would just sit back and say, okay, what are my fiduciary responsibilities in this, probably eliminate a lot of headache for you.
Well, Mike, you're absolutely right. And first, I'm delighted to see that he remember to disclose the agency relationship, even if it was the wrong one. And looking at the word fiduciary, could this individual really put his client's needs ahead of his own? Mm-hmm. And that's what fiduciary really means, is as you lead or as you walk through a transaction, remembering to always think about what is good for my client here? What's in the best interest of my client? And this individual would have almost an impossible time, as Marge said, coming up with what is best for his client in lieu of what was best for himself.
I just wish that the Department of Real Estate and or the attorneys that create these terms would create words that I could spell. Fiduciary is it's a very long word. All right, Jim, in this scenario, what are the risks associated? Okay, we understand that this is a big no-no, but what are the risks from a designated broker's perspective, the risks for the agent and for you?
Sure. There are a number of risks, obviously. Part of it, though, is to understand you still have a duty to disclose. Mm-hmm. So even if I'm the principal in the transaction, what's the contract say? Contract says seller is going to disclose anything that would materially and adversely affect the buyer's decision to buy. In fact, that's a commissioner's rule as well. So there's still going to be some disclosure obligations. But the question does come on the agency side, where you look at the rest of the fiduciary obligations, and whether we're talking about loyalty or whether we're talking about confidentiality or accounting, some accounting is going to be regardless of who we're representing. But the risks are going to be functioning in a agency capacity and favoring one over the other. So that's why if you have an ownership interest in the property, you need to represent yourself only. If you're going to still write it up or whatnot, you can function in a non-agency capacity. In fact, in the old days, back when we started, back in the 80s, we had a term called sub-agency, which we bump into only once in a while, thankfully. And if you can function that way with, again, full disclosure, you can still perform in here. But in the most part, you're better off referring it to another agent, either outside of your company or inside your company, just to work with the buyer and get the buyer's questions answered and advise the buyer as to what's going on.
All right, Marge, okay, as we continue the conversations about the risks, and it's easy for the brokers and the commissioner to talk about, say, don't do this. These are the risks you put us in. But I think more so we need to put ourselves in the perspective of the agent's shoes and the motives behind this, and how greed how greed a lot of times results into bad decisions. Because the scenario here for a lot of agents is, if I only represent myself and I'm upfront and clear with the buyer, they might go out and get a buyer's agent, and now I'm calculating the 3% that I'm going to have to pay to another agent. So a lot of times that can become the motive for the seller who's an agent here. But like I said, greed sometimes, not always, but results in a lot of just bad decisions. And at the end of the day, that commission could be a lot cheaper than what's going to be coming down the pipe.
Well, exactly. And that's where I was thinking, okay, so 3% of the sales price is how much? And let's see, most of the good real estate attorneys that I know are available for $350, $500, $600 an hour. And, I guess what they need to look at very sincerely is, what is the downside? And in a worst case scenario, couldn't it and wouldn't it end up costing me a heck of a lot more? And, there's so many times if I were to refer it out or even if they do go to somebody else, I can win in the court of public opinion also. I can also win for having properly disclosed this and let them know that if you want sole representation, go here. And then on future real estate transactions, have them say, hey, when I've got somebody that was that clear and that specific, that works well too. So, I mean, there's an awful lot that we can look at that's much more positive than, just saving this commission right now. From everybody out there that's, licensed and working, they're functioning the same as the for sale by owner. with that same mindset. The number one reason the for sale by owner doesn't want to work with us is they want to save the commission. The reality is we as licensees can more frequently than not make more money for them as a result of the proper representation. And it's the same thing. They just are wearing a different hat and they're not thinking of it in that regard.
All right, Commissioner. So, and I think a lot of people forget, as commissioner, you used to be a real estate agent. So you've walked in our shoes and so forth. So what are the suggestions? How do we, as the seller and listing agent, handle this situation? What should we do?
Well, I would say, as Marge said, farm it out. Farm that buyer out and do it as quickly as possible. Talk to your broker, find out exactly how they would prefer, whether it be within the company, whether it be outside of the company. But Marge's suggestions around bringing another person in to represent that buyer so you can really represent yourself.
All right, let's.
Mike, I think one thing on this is that we're talking about the concept, but let's take it to the streets. And if you go to the streets, let's talk about what happens during the inspection period. First of all, who's going to pick the inspection? Wait, I'm the seller, and now I'm going to pick my inspector? Ooh, that's not going to play well. And that creates the issue. And now the inspector comes out, and you've got, your 30-page report, 2-page summary report with all these suggested repairs. And now I'm the seller, limited rep, I'm going to tell the buyer which repairs don't worry about. That's not a big deal, And so you just have an issue with how does the inspection report come out, and how do you get into the Binzer and get through the Binzer process when you're trying to function as both the buyer's representative as well as owning the property yourself.
Well, speaking of the streets, that's where we always pick up Marge on the way in. So it's great. No, and as someone myself who knows many attorneys and attorneys across many fields, this is the case that I want, because this is a slam dunk if I'm representing the buyer. And when you're on the other side and you're facing a lawsuit where the other attorney is salivating, it's not going to turn out very well for you. All right, this is one of my favorites because we've all been here. So I'm going to try to summarize this. So a listing agent has a major argument with his seller because they learned that the AC, though working right now, is not expected to last through the summer. So the listing agent goes to the seller, says, we need to disclose this. Okay, we need to disclose it on the spuds because though it's working now, it's probably not going to last. And so we might refer to this as a latent defect. The seller says, listen, we're not disclosing this. We're not putting it on the spuds because it is working right now. And therefore, I don't want to disclose it. So after they argue, they decide to mutually cancel the listing agreement. Now the agent sees that the property has been listed by somebody else a month or two later. Can the former listing agent call and advise the current agent about the AC problem? And what if the former listing agent shows up and what if the former listing agent shows the property to a prospective buyer? What, if anything, can we as the former listing agent disclose, Commissioner?
I'd say pick up the phone and call that other agent right away.
Really?
That's an unusual response.
Well, the big question, and Judy's right. The big question is, can I tell that other agent? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh,
no,
yes.
the answer is yes. Now, the real warning, I think, here, though,
now take it to the street.
Yeah. But, the real thing that you have to be concerned with here is, have they, am I now going to create a problem? I better know that what I'm saying is factual, not, gossip or innuendo or something. I better know that what I'm sharing with them, is real and not just something that I heard. But if I had been that agent there, can I pick up the phone and call them? Yes, but I wouldn't call with the accusations. What I would do instead is say, by the way, I'm just curious, have they corrected it? Have they replaced the air conditioning compressor or the unit itself? Because this was an issue. And if I were working with a buyer, I would say the same thing. One concern that I think we need to look at is that when I had this before, here's a report that came in. So you clearly are going to want to, have that inspected and satisfy yourself. In other words, I'm not going to say it's bad, he's disgusting, I dumped him, or something of that sort.
Now, Jim, here's my problem with this. Okay, because we don't have a contract in this scenario yet, so it doesn't appear that an inspection has been done. Who gives the agent the right to say, I don't expect the AC unit? I'm a licensed real estate agent. I'm not an AC technician. And where does this idea of it's not expected to last? Because that's, to me, that opens up a whole can of worms.
It absolutely does, but it's amazing how the real estate gods work. If the AC needs work, they always call the same company that's worked on it before, that said, oh, I told the seller that this was on its last legs and this was a Band-Aid and this needed to be addressed specifically. Don't know why that happens, but it always seems to happen. Maybe it's those little stickers that they put on the AC unit on their, as they're leaving. And that, and those are people that then get called. So when I read the question the first time, can they call? The answer is yes. If it's an in-house deal, I would say they must call, because now, again, we have information. The agent has information, so the designated broker has information. Therefore, the next agent has to have it. If it's from a different company, can they call? I agree with Marge and Judy. The answer is yes. Should they call? It depends if you want to get involved or not. And that's where that thing comes up. But the showing the property is where the interesting thing. And Marge did it. Marge presented it in such a great manner. I mean, it's not with the accusation. It's kind of was the air conditioning addressed? Because when I had the listing, this was something that we were discussing, which is a great way to do it. And and if I get to the point of writing the contract, I might address that up front, really, as opposed to waiting for the inspection.
Okay, so now the question is, if I'm the new listing agent and I get the call from the old listing agent, what are my responsibilities? I got a call from the previous listing agent, brought some concerns to me. What happens if I just ignore it, or do I have obligations now to go to the seller and say, okay, I've been made aware by that you have problems? Then the seller's going to get upset because the seller knows where this is coming from. So what does the new listing agent do?
Fiduciary wise, it becomes a conflict. However, when you look at Arizona law, it says that once you know something, you have to disclose any latent material fact that might impact the price. So we're not talking about disclosure here. We're talking about not having to disclose it down the road by having the seller either disclose it or take care of it. And if he takes care of it, then we don't have to disclose it.
But he didn't take care of it the first time, so I don't think he's going to want to take care of it the second time.
And he may not. But when you go through this again, I think the way you present it is going to, be tantamount to whether or not we're going to be successful. So if Jim now came to me and asked me this question, I 100% agree with, Commissioner Lowe. I do have to, address this somehow, some way. I can't now stick my head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist. So what I could do is come to you as the seller and say, Mike, I spoke with your former agent who may have, somebody interested in the property, but the question was, has anything ever been done about the air conditioning because of the things that they were told? Because she would like to know, or he would like to know, how to present it to the prospective buyer to keep you out of trouble and him out of trouble and so forth. So, share with me, and if you go that way where it's not, really confrontational, that'd be great. And if we had agents who would do it that way, that would be even better.
And you're so good because you give the vocabulary, you give the language to use as we're walking through a situation like this, Marge.
Good. Thank you.
And so then now as the old listing agent, I don't have to worry about any repercussions from the seller, say, getting angry at me that I went to their new agent. There are no repercussions.
Well, when you say no repercussions, they could threaten you. They can do all they want. But
you do that to me daily.
Well, but you deserve it. The agents we work with are going to be good guys. But,
I've got so many Latin defects.
Yeah. But no, the thing is, I would far rather have somebody say, I'm going to sue you for doing what you're supposed to do, and for fulfilling the fiduciary duties and or responsibilities, and or for complying with the statutes or the laws that say disclosure is supposed to be done, than one angry seller who wants to, pull the wool over somebody's eyes.
All right.
But again, the question that we're getting to is it confidential information? Is that confidential information that's part of the fiduciary, therefore you can't share?
No. To me, when we're talking about material or latent defects, that is not considered confidential. And there's a lot of case law that would support that.
All right. Good stuff. All right. Let's move on. A holiday weekend is here. Every broker's nightmare. A holiday weekend is here, and everyone is ready to enjoy it. The broker gets a call from a buyer broker stating that he has been trying for a day and a half to reach the listing agent, who is apparently MIA. The broker tries to reach her agent but can't find her. So, and we've never have agents that go MIA. The following morning, she gets another call from the buyer broker demanding someone to help. Jim, what can be done, and where does the responsibility lie? Well, I'm sure you have this all the time.
It lies with the designated broker. Depending on the setup of the company, it might be just me, or as a designated broker, it might be one of my broker branch managers that I have in each office. So when this comes in, I'm going to find out where the agent is, and I'm going to find out, which office they're licensed out of. And then I'm going to either handle it if they're out of my office, or I'm going to refer it to the branch manager of the office that they're out of. And basically, we've got the obligation to follow the rule. Judy, what's the rule?
Well, the rule says that the broker is the responsible party. And if the broker can delegate it to another responsible party and still be responsible, remain responsible, that's the best way to handle it. This is one of the things that makes the phone ring at the department, though, is the inability to get a call back from the person that they're trying to call. And not to bring up another topic here, but with teams, sometimes that caller really isn't asking or trying to get a hold of the right person. And that's why they're not getting a call back. They're calling the last person that they interacted with, and really there's someone else who would be the person responsible for answering their question. But ultimately, it's the designated broker who is responsible. And like Jim says, jumping in there and taking care of it, and either getting someone that will call back who will accept the responsibility for it, delegated to them, or jumping in there and taking care of it from the designated broker perspective.
Now, I know, and this will be another question for you, Commissioner. I know at West USA, we have, and I'm sure Realty One Group probably has the same policy. However, none of our agents know. When we go out of town, we have a specific form that agents are supposed to complete and fill out. Is that a corporate broker policy, or is that a Department of Real Estate rule?
It's a corporate broker policy, and it would be nice to see it in the broker policy manual, which every broker must have. It's the first document that an auditor asks for when they go out to do an audit of a real estate company, is, may I see your broker policy manual? And most every broker has one, especially if they're West USA or Realty One. And in that broker policy manual, every licensee who is licensed with that company knows exactly what they're supposed to do when they're going to be out of town. And that's to notify their manager or their designated broker that they're going to be away and who's going to be taking their calls.
Because I think what we're talking about here is that the broker is on the clock now. The buyer broker has put the company on notice that I've got an offer, I've got some questions here, and I've got an offer, and I need somebody to present to. And so I think we're following our 428-1102, which says, there's two things that can be done, and that is, give me the, I'm on the 24-hour clock, and somebody needs to be available from the company to represent your client. And then, oh, by the way, and then there's another option if nobody is available, that the buyer broker can go direct.
But how does that change? I mean, there's obviously perception-wise, there's a difference between we've got an offer here and we can't find the listing agent, as opposed to I've got a buyer that has some questions. Does that and not necessarily I've got an offer, it's just some questions about the property because we're trying to determine whether we're going to write an offer?
No, that's a big difference, because again, the question becomes, do you have something that needs to be presented to the seller? If there's questions, then yes, then you put out the all points bulletin on the agent to say, how do we get a hold of them? And in my case, I'm going to call them on every number that I have. I'm going to email them on every email that I have. And and then I might even, if depending on how serious it is, I might even go to Facebook and see where they're streaming live, right, Mark? And see where they are and where their vacation has taken them to.
Marge, okay, the one thing that hasn't been discussed about this, and to me, which is the most concerning, is the lack of fiduciary responsibility that the listing agent is having to their seller. I mean, so what kind of repercussions are there? Because as a buyer's agent, okay, I might be one of the only agents, but I sometimes get petty. So, so I would get so frustrated in this scenario. I might try to find a way somehow for that buyer, that seller, to find out, hey, I can't find your agent, and we've got an offer here. What kind of repercussions in that scenario does that listing agent possibly have for just going MIA, not letting anyone know? And I'm the seller here now, and I find out that somebody wants to buy my house, and I have no representation.
Sure. How high is high? Because how difficult can this be? It depends on the temperament and the issues that you're going to be confronted with. Jim and I was just saying to him, we were talking about something here a moment ago that happened. It's a good number of years ago, but I think a good scenario in that a buyer's agent did call, had a contract on a property, trying to reach, the agent, and through texts, through emails, through voice messages, trying to get a hold of the other agent, and never did find him and, get a hold of him. So what we did then from a broker standpoint was bring in another agent and ask the other agent, will you come in, get the file? And, it's here again, it goes back, like Judy said, what are your policies and procedures? What is the broker's policy? What are you going to do? And in that particular case, we went to another agent and said, here's who the seller is. Here's, what it is. And if you negotiate this, here's the amount of the compensation that the listing agent should have received, that you are going to be paid for what you did. And that is the broker's authorization, or, the broker's policy. And that certainly speaks in many cases. So we really want them to know, if I have now the broker's authorization and or permission, assuming that I got them within this time frame, like Jim was talking about, my feeling, if I'm the buyer's agent, is I want to go in not in an adversarial position with that seller, even though I may want to be, what was the word you used? Petty? Or no, what? I forgot.
Petty.
Okay, whatever.
Vindictive.
But yeah.
Childish.
Get that booger. I know. But what I would want to do is call that seller and say, I've been trying to reach Mike and haven't been successful. I do have a purchase contract that, I would like to present to you. Do you have any idea how or where I can reach him? Because maybe they do know. I mean, it's a possibility. Maybe they do know. And if they say no, well, all right, with your permission, I do want you to understand that I represent the buyer, but I'd certainly like to give you the benefit of knowing, what this offer is, so you don't miss it. May I have your permission to come over and present the contract to you, even though you won't have representation there?
Now, Jim, in that scenario, I would think as a broker, you probably want to let coming from you, that listing agent, know what happened before an agent gets stabbed in the heart come Monday morning, right? and in my scenario, out of my pettiness, as much as I'm joking aside, it's something that I would want to do, not necessarily that I would do. But as a buyer's agent, under no circumstances should I ever go to the seller directly. Yay or nay?
Oh,
Well, you've got
You
the
can.
ability, according
That's
to
you
right.
can.
According to the rule.
Go ahead, Judy.
According to the rule, after what's the
24.
time?
It is 24 hours.
And a buyer broker cannot reach the listing broker. They can go directly, or their broker, the listing broker, or the listing agent. They can go directly to
But what we can't
consumer.
do is call the seller and say, "Hey, your listing agent's terrible. How about I list the house for you?"
Can't talk negative.
You know,
No,
it's
no.
That's
kind
not
of
called
interesting.
petty, Mike, by the way. That's not
Yeah.
petty.
It's
Can't
kind of
solicit.
interesting. The way the rule reads is, if no licensed representative from that company is available in that 24 hours, then in fact you can go. You can go in, and even though I'd like to say most people aren't petty, unfortunately, I don't know that I would call it petty. I'd call it frustrated, aggravated, disgusted. You can come up with a lot of other words, but it's not uncommon for a buyer broker to feel like you. They're out there, they're busting their backside. They found a property, they've written something, and they find it offensive that you're so irresponsible that you're not available. And so that's not uncommon.
Rule of thumb, and I know this happens, but it goes without saying, it's common sense. If you've got listings or you're working with clients and you're going out of town and you're going to be somewhere where you can't take calls, receive emails, find someone who can do it for you, or at the very least, notify everybody you're working with that I'm going to be MIA, and notify them, because I'm telling you, as a seller, if I found out that this was going on and my listing agent left, and
You're going to get ticked off.
and I may be under some sort of contractual agreement with him, but I'd find every way to fire that listing agent.
Well, it's kind of interesting when Jim was talking about those real estate gods that are out there sometimes. What happens, I think a lot of the listing agents say, you know what, things have been slow. I only have one listing. We haven't had any calls. We haven't had these issues come up. So I'm not really worried. And I've got my phone with me. But in the scenario that I was talking about a little bit ago, what happened there was the agent did have his cell phone with him. He did have this. What he didn't know is that he was not going to be able to get reception while he was at Lake Powell. And that's where he was. He was up at Lake Powell and said, "Hey, it's not my fault. I was there. I was well, yeah, it is your fault, unfortunately."
The buck stops with you.
Exactly.
Always.
Exactly. So it's, if nothing else, what I would suggest is, even though you don't think it's going to happen, I could pick up the phone and call Judy, because she's my buddy at the office, and say, "Judy, by the way, I'm going to be gone for 3 days. If there are any questions or issues, would you take them?"
Exactly.
And then I, in turn, will reciprocate and work with her. It doesn't have to be a monetary exchange. Just I'll help you, you help me. I've got your back, you get mine.
That's right.
All right. Moving right along, want to just do a quick announcement. Jim, we got your very own Russell Shaw headlining our next Six-Figure Mindshift Entrepreneur Summit. This is a who's who. We talk so much about, top producers in real estate, and we've got some of the top producers, but we've also got some phenomenal entrepreneurial minds outside of the real estate industry. And this is part of our perspective as real estate agents. I could implement every plan, every piece of technology possible, but until I always tell agents, Jim, I got new agents, got good news and bad news. The good news is you own your own business. The bad news is you own your own business, right? and everything that comes along with it. So we want to invite everybody to visit with us and come to the next Six-Figure Mindshift Summit. We're going to send you a link right now. Just use the code 6FMS. You can have $10 off, but we're looking forward to it. And if you never heard the likes of Russell Shaw or Joshua Smith speak, it's phenomenal. So, all right, let's go to our next scenario. All right. So I sold a house to a client that was to be a rental investment property. The owner oh Lord, we see this all the time. I don't know if I can say it with a straight face. The owner landlord was going to manage the property themselves and did not hire a property manager, though they were out of state. Happens all the time. So they provided their tenant an address where they were to mail the rent and telephone numbers in case they had any problems. Wonder whose number they put. I would occasionally arrange. Now, this is the agent now. Okay, no property management agreement signed, executed. I would occasionally arrange for a plumber or an electrician because I had local contacts. Twice, not wanting their rent to be late, the tenants dropped their rent checks off at my office and I deposited them into the landlord's bank account. Commissioner, just because because you're the most excited right now to jump on this one, any concerns?
The biggest concern I have is that person who assumed the acceptance of the tenant's checks didn't realize that they more than likely were a property manager, became a property manager. But I will say that there is no definition for property manager nor property management.
That was my next question.
That a broker could go to or that the licensee could go to and determine whether this activity was really putting them in a category called a property manager. I would say that we would send him directly to his broker.
And I think one thing that Judy's alluding to is the fact that, is there a contract that the agent is performing under? It's, they've rented the property and the rental listing said, go find a tenant. The job was complete. And so do they have a job that continues after they found the tenant and the tenant have moved in? And so these other activities that they're performing, are other activities that they're doing really without a contract or without authorization or direction from the landlord.
And maybe no compensation.
Am I looking at this too simplistic to relate it to a regular purchase contract? That once somebody moves in, the rental agreement is executed. Could I look at it and say, listen, agency's over. So nothing in this carries over.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. And so how do you have the authority to hire a plumber, to hire an electrician? As a matter of fact, who's paying for those tasks? Mm-hmm. In the event the plumber turns out to do shoddy work, who's responsible for the plumber's actions?
Not to mention Denise Holliday's name, because I wouldn't do that. But sincerely, she does an awful lot of work when it comes to property management and, landlord representation and so forth. And very specifically, I've heard her address this and say what you found is that this agent, as well intended as they are and as helpful as they want to be, we can applaud them and pat them on the back. But now what has happened is they have created an accidental property management issue, which could be actionable and could, in fact, put them into, a legal harm or legal risk because of, those kind gestures. And I'm not saying that facetiously. More often than not, I think it is where the agent wants to help. And it's like, hey, they're good people. They're out of state. Where's the harm? Where's the foul? Well, there probably won't be any harm or foul if nothing goes awry. But when it does, it's amazing how now all of a sudden that appreciative landlord, former seller, says, hey, no, I didn't ask you to do this, and here's what it was, and I'm sorry, but you didn't tell me that I had to pay this money when you contacted this plumber, or you didn't tell me what it was going to cost with the electrician. You arranged it, you pay for it. They
will always lose without a written agreement, I'm assuming.
That's right,
think so.
And accepting the rent checks. What if those rent checks got lost? The tenant said they dropped them off. The licensee, the broker, never saw them.
And the agent's in Vegas for a weekend.
And they never got deposited to the landlord's bank account. That becomes a conflict.
So, Jim, am I safe to say, though, so help me out here as the basic agent. So there's not so much of law per se as maybe it comes a lot down to the broker's policies here of don't do this and these are the rules.
Sure. For example, some companies like Realty One, we don't do property management. West USA has an entire property management department, and so they have specific broker policies in their policy manual that says what you can and can't do, and when does this type of activity fall over or to go over into a property management. But because, Judy, help me out. How many of these activities require a real estate license? I mean, do I am I functioning as a licensee when I hire a plumber on someone's behalf or an electrician?
More than likely not.
Okay, how about taking the rent?
Taking the rent, more than likely not.
Really? Even with accounting?
But what if
Finding the tenant, absolutely.
Okay.
Front desk, accepting the rent, giving a receipt back, depends on the broker's policy.
Okay.
There's nothing in licensed law. Now, if front desk was responsible for giving information on a rental and helping that potential tenant find a property or locate a property, then it would require a real estate license. But more than likely, these two scenarios wouldn't require one.
But in this scenario, I
Mandated.
would say for sure the listing or the agent probably should never have their rent check made payable to them, and then they in turn cut a check to.
That would be a good
I say,
suggestion.
'cause I'm telling you, someone's probably had to have done it in the past, right?
Oh yeah.
We don't
Oh,
have
yes.
rules without previous history.
How do you have access to the landlord's bank account? You know, that's the part of the scenario that scares me.
You just need a you just need a checking account number.
Well, and why do I have that? Again, if
Because
I got
the
you.
landlord gave it to you and you accepted it.
for how long, and how long is my authority to access that account? You know?
Well, I will tell you this, Jim. I'm going to give you my checking account number.
Thank you.
And for the rest of as long as we both live, you could just keep depositing money, and there will be no expiration on that.
And you know, when I hired the plumber, Mike, you know, there came a bill, so I just want to make sure how does the plumber get paid? Should I just access your account
Forward
for that
to
too?
Marge. All right. I currently work for ABC Realty, and do we have any company really like ABC Realty? Because if not, I think I want to start my own brokerage called ABC Realty.
Because everybody
Because they get a lot
uses
of
it.
press here,
Yeah.
right? So I currently work for ABC Realty after several years with XYZ Realty. I need a licensed agent to help me with paperwork and occasionally scheduling appointments with clients, workers, and repairmen. I needed a transaction coordinator, and I liked working with Janie at XYZ. So I hired her, though she is still licensed with my former broker. To ensure there were no legal concerns, all paychecks were sent to Janie through her broker at XYZ Realty. We'll start with you, Commissioner, because I get all kinds of questions about transaction coordinators. Is this particular scenario acceptable?
A transaction coordinator works at the direction of only one designated broker. And they are given the direction through that designated broker or the licensee who is under that designated broker, and they can only be paid by their own designated broker.
So the checks are getting paid to the designated broker for
in a roundabout way.
right. So in that specific scenario, would that be acceptable? I'm not paying Janie directly. I've got her designated broker. I'm using the designated broker as my pass-through account.
The broker can only pay their real estate licensees.
Okay, I got you. I'm sure
You could pay a referral fee to another broker.
But she's doing work that requires a real estate license on behalf of a different company's transaction.
Yes, and that's a transaction coordinator cannot work under anybody other than their designated broker.
So it's not how she's getting paid, because she's getting paid properly. In other words, she's only getting paid from her designated broker, but she's working on transactions for another company, designated broker.
That's the primary. However, what is the arrangement for broker 2 to pay broker 1 where the transaction coordinator is licensed? And is it a referral? Is it compensation for services?
Okay, so typically, let's call it a $300 transaction coordination fee. So if we have that, and the agreement says that you're going to help me with paperwork, you're going to schedule appointments with clients, workers and or repairman, is it okay for Janie to do work for Marge, who's at ABC Realty, and get paid through her broker? Is that going to work?
Are you asking about the payment part of it
No.
or about the representation part of it?
The representation and doing the work.
The representation and doing the work, she can only work under her designated broker.
Right. We kind of, it kind of threw a curveball at you. She's getting paid properly, but she's not working properly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Because that's obviously how she's supposed to get paid. But the fact that she's working on somebody else's listing or somebody else's client with someone else's clients that she's not licensed with creates I think the transaction coordination problem, because you and I have had conversations about virtual assistants, and I know that's a favorite topic of yours.
We won't go there today. You didn't prepare me for that.
Okay, well, I want to spend some more time on this, because this is a very hot topic. I would like to I'd like to talk about the difference between having a transaction coordinator who's got a real estate license as opposed to a transaction coordinator who doesn't have a real estate license, and what are the things that we should know as real estate agents. Okay, I'm going to hire my cousin to be my transaction coordinator, unlicensed. At what's the difference? What is a unlicensed transaction coordinator not allowed to do or allowed to do as opposed to a licensed one?
There's a substantive policy statement, and on one side of the sheet, it'll tell you exactly what an unlicensed transaction coordinator can do. On the other side, it'll talk about what they cannot do. They cannot participate in an open house. They cannot speak with a client regarding property in any form. They cannot communicate regarding specific transactions as far as the document details of those transactions. The substantive policy statement states that they cannot do anything other than set appointments for the individual that they're working with or for. There are about 8 to 10 items that they cannot do. And of course, there are many, many things that they can do, including picking up the kids at school and picking up the dry cleaning and making copies at the copy machine. The minute it steps in to actual real estate activity or giving information or taking the responsibility.
What about scheduling like home inspectors and putting up lock boxes and going out and putting up real estate signs?
The only one that concerns me is the key box. And that would not be an ADRE issue. That would be an MLS issue. Putting up the signs, that's just a matter of physical labor. What was the other one?
Scheduling like home inspectors or
as long
repairmen.
As there is no, in scheduling repairmen and home inspectors, as long as there's no discussion around the transaction. We just had one recently that a consumer called and the transaction coordinator, unlicensed, had called in repair people to do repairs, and it was outside of the property management agreements authority. And of course, then it became, who's going to pay for this?
Well, and I think, as you say, occasionally scheduling appointments for repairman, I think the commissioner's concern is going to be who's telling them what to fix. Mm-hmm. Who's telling them that, these 3 items need to be handled. It's one thing to make an appointment. It's another thing to provide direction.
And the cost, getting an estimate and translating that into the services that were actually provided.
Yeah, I think, Marge, just a great policy is don't have anyone be a transaction coordinator. I mean, for me personally, it'd be my personal perspective, is not to have anyone working on my files or doing anything unless they're licensed, because I can't always control them. Okay, I can say, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, but next thing I know, they go ahead and do it. It's my license on the line.
Yeah, you know what? I'd love, as long as we have the commissioner and Jim here, and this was totally unprepared also, but
we're going to talk about virtual assistants.
No,
okay.
No. What I would love to ask is, because this question comes up so many times. The commissioner's rules do not prohibit me as a listing agent from having Jim as somebody from another company come in and hold an open house on my listing. So the question is always, can I have someone who is from another company holding my property open? And or may I, as a licensed realtor with West USA, hold a Realty One listing open? And my understanding and belief is that, though that's changed several times over these many years, the current commissioner's rules would not prohibit that. And we don't say no. But my question is, how do you handle that, Jim?
Is it a broker policy or?
Yeah, that it is going to be a broker policy, but I would love to know seriously how you handle it and how the commissioner addresses it when she's asked this.
Well, wait, then shouldn't the commissioner go first? I mean, we're going to follow commissioner's rules.
Well,
obviously.
now this is true. Yeah, Judy, this is called CYA. We're covering our assets here.
And here again, it's who does that on-site individual who is licensed, who do they represent? And has it been fully disclosed to the consumer? Whose open house signs are out in front? Whose yard sign is there? Whose business card is being handed out?
Right.
Walk in the shoes of the consumer. They need to know who they're working with and what company that individual works for. And when they walk into an open house from a yard sign, they know who the designated broker, the employing broker is from the yard sign. That's the most important thing to the ADRE.
Okay.
And from a broker's perspective, you have liability issues. You know, now you've got somebody else that's going to be in the house for an extended period of time, call it an hour, call it 3 hours. And now who's responsible for the seller's stuff, you know, assuming that the house is occupied and all? Because, you know, open houses, not all open houses are safe, and not all people visiting open houses are there to buy a house. Some are there to case the house, or some are there to look at what else is going on. So there's liability issues that it's going to be covered with the broker policy. But I agree. Obviously, I agree with the commissioner that you can't have a different company's open house signs. I could have a flyer advertising the property, but boy, my card better be over the West USA info if I'm using a West USA flyer, you know, and then Realty One over it saying I'm a Realty One representative. But then you get into the whole, now who do you represent?
Exactly.
And now where's that going to go? It does create confusion. So it's not a good idea from my perspective, but I don't have a specific policy in the manual that says you can't do it. But you're going to talk to a broker first, and we're going to say, is this covered? Is that covered?
Yeah.
Here's how you do it. I mean, it's kind of like if a seller wants to hold a house open. Can you have a seller who's not licensed hold a house open? You know, same thing. You're going to have, are you going to confuse the public and put up your company signs? Open house signs are going to be generic open house signs that just say open house.
Yeah, we do just like you do, Jim. And that's saying, can you do it? The answer is yes. Should you do it? The answer is absolutely no. And we definitely discourage it and do anything but, you know, suggest that somebody does something along that line.
Is there any compensation involved, or is it just the opportunity?
Yeah.
It's primarily the
I was going to
opportunity.
say typically the opportunity. Yes. Yeah. Thank you for letting me just deviate there a little bit.
Not like we had a choice.
Yeah, really.
All right, let's wrap up a little bit more property management issues. Obviously, Commissioner, your phone rings off the hook. Fortunately, you don't personally answer every time it rings. And, you know, how many of these calls have to do with property management issues? Would it be a fair assessment to say a lot of them are? And what are some of the top problems or concerns you're facing? And if not property management issues, what are some of the top things that you're facing as the commissioner as far as phone calls?
Well, when the phone rings at the department and it is property management, generally that individual does not know who their designated broker is, or they've tried to get a hold of the designated broker and have gotten no call back. So that's the very first thing that makes the phone ring. However, when we get out doing audits of a brokerage, around property management. There are several issues that are coming forward as far as violations are concerned. But the majority of the property management calls that come in are more landlord tenant. And remember that the department doesn't get involved in landlord tenant issues. We refer those to the Department of Housing or to the Attorney General.
Jim, what are some of the issues you're seeing your agents face?
Well, one that we were chatting about before we went online is talking about do not call situations and whether the department is involved at all in what's going on there, because that's a federal law. FTC is kind of governs if you're working with expired listings or you're working on cold calls, can you just call anybody or who's already opted out? Of course, when I hear my phone ring all night when I get home, it doesn't seem like people are soliciting a listing. It seems like they want me to vote for somebody.
Yeah.
Which obviously is one of the items that gets excluded from the do not call list.
Right.
But does the real estate department get do not call issues?
We do. And there again, primarily it's, in fact, we had one recently. The caller was complaining that they got a call. Their listing expired at midnight and they got a call at 1 a.m. from more than one in a caller who wanted to list that property immediately the next day. Quickest way not to get a listing is to make your calls in the middle of the night. But not only is it the FTC, that's the federal guidelines around do not call, but the Attorney General of Arizona also has some very stringent guidelines around the do not call. And in some instances, the caller must actually register with the AG in order to even make calls that fall within the okay of the Attorney General. The Attorney General's guidelines can be seen at aggov.com, .gov, azag.gov. And many people don't realize that our state also has do not call.
Yeah, and I think most agents and most companies, they take into account that the average consumer doesn't even know how to complain. The average consumer is not going to complain. But boy, if they do, it could cost you some serious money.
Yeah, my understanding is that they did increase that, and it's like with the lead-based paint form, in that they could charge as much as $16,000 for each, violation if they are actually pursued and prosecuted.
And if you want to motivate somebody to file a complaint, call them at 1 a.m.
That's right.
That ought to do it. That ought to do it.
No
That's
kidding.
right.
All right, Commissioner, thank you. Jim, Marge, thanks for joining us today. Greatly appreciate it. I want to encourage all of our listeners to sign up into our digital community for the Six Figure Mind Shift blog, where each and every week we send you some great materials on being an entrepreneur, increasing sales, learning how to take your business to the next level. You can go to sixfiguremindshift.com, register for that. Our next broker roundtable will be Friday, October 28th. We've got Dwayne Fouts coming in. So excited to talk with him, see what he's got going. And with that, appreciate everybody joining us and have a great and successful day.